Hello, Space Watchers, and welcome back to another episode of Space Café Radio. This is my first time after a while, so it's nice to be back behind the microphone. I'm very happy to be here. Today's guest is Declan Ganley, Chairman and CEO of Rivada Space Networks. Rivada has recently announced the launch of a new low Earth orbit constellation, so we're here today just to understand a bit more about this and why it's important. So let me give a very warm welcome to Declan. Welcome to our studio. Thank you for being with us. How are you today?
Very, very well, Emma. Good morning from Washington, D.C., and it's great to be on your show.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Declan, I'm reading your biography, which says you are a telecommunication entrepreneur, having built businesses across Europe and the United States. And representing Rivada Networks, you received the Louisiana National Guard Distinguished Civilian Service Medal for your work during Hurricane Katrina. First of all, congratulations for this achievement. And secondly, since your biography doesn't tell me the journey that you made to reach this point, do you mind to let us know how did you arrive to the satellite business?
Well, it's lucky that this isn't on tape and that this is digital because it's a long story, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. I really don't think you want the whole thing. So, I'm an entrepreneur. I actually, you asked about my journey to the satellite business. It's funny because my wife says I've come full circle. So when I finished school in Ireland in 1987, I went to London and I got myself a job with a Lloyd's Marine insurance broker. And the fancy job I had was basically coffee boy, making the tea and coffee for people in the office in the morning. But it was a job and it got me into the city of London and I felt good about myself. And I had been a radio hobbyist. I used to build my own radios. I was in the Irish Army National Guard in the artillery, and communications and radio communications was something that had really attracted me and that I'd been fascinated with. I'd always been fascinated by radio. And I was reading a magazine one morning, and there was an article in it. It was a technical magazine, but there was an article in it. This was in 1987 about the Soviet space launch program and the fact that Challenger had blown up the year before in 1986, this shuttle, for those of your listeners that are old enough to remember that, and that there was a backlog of Western communication satellites that needed to be launched, and that this Soviet launch program was doing much better. They were doing more launches at the time, etc. So I walked into one of the partners at this Lloyd's Marine insurance brokerage I worked for, whose coffee I used to make in the morning. And I said, this firm, I think I even had the temerity to say we, like I'm the T-boy. We should look at ensuring the launch of Western communication satellites on Soviet launch platforms. And he said, that's a really interesting idea. You should do some research on it and let me know what you find out. So I went to the Google of 1987, which was called the Yellow Pages, and looked under S for Soviet and dialed the Soviet embassy. Then I called the Soviet trade delegation and ended up being asked to go and meet them. Much to my surprise, and I was 19 years old, they took me seriously. And I ended up being asked to organize a delegation to visit Glavkosmos in Moscow. This was in January of 1988. And look, the story is stranger than fiction, but we ended up signing an MOU, or an MOU ended up being signed to launch 3 communication satellites on a Proton booster. Now, that all got stopped because the U.S. government, quite rightly, I must point out at the time, said, can't do that. Soviet Union might steal the technology. We don't trust them in sending stuff over in a diplomatic bag. They won't check the satellites, etc. So that was stopped. And so I dropped that, and I ended up in the forestry business, which has got absolutely nothing to do with satellites or aerospace. Privatized 28 sawmills, sold that business in July of 1997, but never forgot about my interest in the satellite and space arena and communications. And what I did is I set up a business to bid for the second mobile phone license in Ireland, the GSM license. That was in 1994-95. I didn't win that. I did then go on to found Broadnet, which ended up winning fixed wireless LMDS licenses all across Europe, across 10 countries in Europe in the late 1990s. And I sold that business to Comcast. But we had fixed wireless licenses across 10 countries in Europe. We built out the top 42 cities in Germany, the top 14 in France, and a lot of others. I sold that business to Comcast. And I founded Rivada Networks. I also did a roll-up of the cable TV industry in Bulgaria, sold that business. And I set up Rivada in the aftermath of 9/11, of the events of September the 11th and the World Trade Center. My wife's family business was in World Trade Center too. It was run by her eldest brother. And they all got out. They none of them were killed. But my other brother, one of my other brother-in-laws, was a New York firefighter, and his radio failed on 9/11, and he was one of two guys from his firehouse that survived that day. And so that's really what got me focused on looking at the public safety and emergency broadband communication space. And to make a long story short, that led to the founding of Rivada Networks, initially focused on the public safety and emergency communication space. And the realization that we needed to share spectrum, that public safety shouldn't have to have stovepiped systems that were, exclusive to them, but that didn't benefit from the explosion of technology and technological capability around wireless that was occurring in the civilian world. So we applied, if you like, cellular, the best of class from cellular to that public safety communication space, and came up with patents and inventions like tiering priority of access to radio resources, sharing spectrum, which had never been done before. So sharing spectrum amongst different commercial users and tiering priority of access to it. Now, this is all in the early 2000s and early and mid, that sort of from 2004 through to really 2013. We were instrumental in setting up what became FirstNet in the United States, and then a number of other businesses. We went down to Latin America, worked in Mexico, in Chile, and a number of other places, and developed a suite of patents, a group of PhDs and engineers in Rivada that really focused on sharing spectrum and the radio resource in an efficient way and clearing all of the capacity all of the time, the gigabytes, if you will, in an open access wholesale market. And this is what drew me to satellite spectrum in the Ka band in particular, because these are massive tracts of spectrum, some of the biggest in the world, 4,000 megahertz in the case of the Ka band. That's giant. If you think that with FirstNet in the United States, okay, it was 700 megahertz spectrum, but it was 20 megahertz of the 700. We're talking about 4,000 megahertz in the Ka band. And that it is shared spectrum with, if you like, a sort of tiering of priority of access with the prioritization depending on who filed first. This was a very natural fit with our whole philosophical approach to wireless and how radio resources should be shared. So we came at this industry really from the bottom up, from the ground up, realizing that ultimately, while it's spaceships and lasers and all of that stuff, it's very, very exciting, and I love it as much as any 12-year-old loves that stuff. What ultimately pays the bills is clearing and selling gigabytes for money. And that's what pays the bills. And we had come up with a way of doing that is extremely innovative and that clears all of the capacity all of the time. And that, frankly, to put it very simply, makes more money from those gigabytes. And that's what attracted me to this space. So you did ask the question, and believe me, that's the short version. So
you did came full circle. Your wife is right. Yeah. Actually, I can see now how you just closed the passion.
She's Italian. So,
oh, okay. There you go. Perfect. What else? So you mentioned the fact that you believe that your technology is innovative. Can you explain me how? Because, for example, you mentioned the Ka band, right? And the K-band spectrum is actually quite proven technology in a sort of way. It's not such a new thing. So what is the novelty in what you're doing in the launching of your new satellites?
Oh, great question. So you're quite right. There's nothing novel in the Ka band or how that's going to be. It's what is novel is how we clear the capacity itself. So once you turn the spectrum into gigabytes, and it's how you sell those. So rather than sort of the traditional model, and this isn't the case just for satellite, this is also the case for terrestrial wireless, and it's a case that Roberta has said this is a huge problem. Traditionally, what happens is the carrier, be it a satellite operator or AT&T or Vodafone, they say, this is the price of the gigabyte and, take it or leave it. And these gigabytes clear on your cellular plan or whatever it might be for X amount per month. And you've got, they say unlimited use, but there's no such thing as unlimited. There's always a cap on these things. So there's a price per gigabyte built in, and that if you're not willing to pay that price, you don't get any capacity. And the philosophy that we brought to this and the technology that we brought to this was really levered off wholesale electricity markets, which is to say, make the gigabytes available and clear them in an open access wholesale market and make them available 24/7, 365, and whatever the wholesale market's willing to pay, clear the capacity. So that means if the market's only willing to pay a fraction of a cent per, for 100 gigabytes, for argument's sake, and otherwise you weren't going to sell those 100 gigabytes because at 4:15 in the morning in some rural area there was no other use for it, take the money, clear the capacity. And what that does is, the market as it looks, there's no Internet of Things with prices of gigabytes where they are right now. This Internet of Things and smart cities is going to be the stuff of Accenture and Deloitte and EY, management consulting papers and interesting newspaper articles and print articles and podcasts, but it ain't going to happen. We have to get from, unless prices drop, we have to get from 1.3 mobile connected devices per capita to 200 plus mobile connected devices per capita. And I don't mean that everyone's going to have, 200 of these in their pockets. They're not going to have 200 smartphones, but there are going to be small devices all over in infrastructure, in agriculture, in health, in everything. If the price for them accessing the radio resource is very, very inexpensive on average, you're going to see a massive growth in truly the Internet of Things. So we go from 1.3 per capita to 200, maybe more per capita. I remember the days making presentations when people said that in one day in the far distant future, up to 10% of the population would have a mobile phone. I remember being laughed at when people said that. When I said it to a board, I won't say of which company, that school children would have mobile phones, I got actually laughed at in the room. So
and now
here we are. And another time I said, people will put their mobile phone numbers on their business cards. And the guy who's the president of a very large company today, I won't name him, said to me, he was much younger then, and so was I. He said, well, that's never going to happen. And I said, why? And he said, because then people would have to pay for people to call them. And I said, that's just a dumb billing model. That's just that. Back then, it was called party pays. If someone called your mobile number, you paid for the phone call. And I mean, these are just stupid business models. And what we have in wireless, frankly, in satellite and terrestrial both, is a stupid business model. And we have to change it if we want the Internet of Things to be real. And that's what Rivada Networks is going to do.
So because you mentioned the laser before, you don't think the laser is the answer to...
Oh, no. The laser is absolutely the answer. And it's what we are doing, and I dare to say we're the first constellation that from the get-go, from the very beginning, the whole concept was create a meshed laser network in low Earth orbit space. So our orbital zone, if you like, is 1,050 kilometers. So we're not at 500 or 600 kilometers. So we can put something up there that's bigger than a laptop, more refrigerator size. So it's got a lot of backup power. It can do a lot of things. It can do a lot of work. There will be 600 of them when we're fully deployed, making a planetary grid connected by lasers on those satellites. And those lasers have redundancy. And the way that we've designed it, and being in the Goldilocks space that we are in terms of altitude and the very high priority rights that we have to the Ka band, this is one of the top three. And it's above Starlink, for example, it's above Kuiper in terms of its prioritization. Those laser links are the backhaul, the connectivity, the security. And if you want a cyber secure, very low latency network, tapping into the Rivada constellation is going to be the way to go, because we're going to have very high speeds, better than subsea cable. You're going through the near vacuum of space using lasers. You're not going through glass. You're not being gated by ground stations. That has a very marked effect on latency and massively increases security. There's no submarine splicing laser beams in space. That may happen on subsea cables, but it's not happening on those laser connections. So we're very excited about that. To your point, it works. So this isn't science fiction. What we want to do is democratize access, if you like, at the enterprise level, make these enterprise services like this available to enterprises that previously would have found the barriers to entry too high.
So Declan, let me ask you something that just made the headlines a few days ago, the Clio versus Clio litigation. What's the Rivada's position regarding this issue, and how do you think this is going to affect this project?
So what you're talking about, for folks that wouldn't be familiar, is a company in Germany called Clio Connect that had been developing a business plan to deploy in this space. The company that actually holds the frequency licenses is a company called Trion, which is in Liechtenstein. It's not Clio Connect. So Clio Connect only ever had a provisional and subject to a lot of different basis on which it was making these plans. There were a group of Chinese government-backed shareholders that were in that company. I won't get into the details of this, but it wouldn't strike your listeners as being particularly surprising, given other things that you read about what goes on with China. But let's just say that there was absolutely no way in the world that this plan of theirs was credible or was capable of being executed upon. And furthermore, there are some very strict rules with regard to moving or de facto moving a constellation rights from one place to another. This is a European constellation. These are European filings, and it was pretty obvious, and not just obvious, but actually categorically stated that the plan was to move these to China. And while there would have been, if you like, a sort of front organization left remaining in Germany, everything else would have been moved. And that was not something that the minority shareholder in Clio Connect that had a very clear rights was going to allow the European shareholder. So we stepped in and frankly saved the project. So the licenses are no longer provisionally being used or allowed to be used by Clio Connect. That's finished. That's been terminated. That's done. So Clio Connect no longer has the use of those licenses. Those licenses have been removed. And so, if you like, it has been amputated from the filings. Now, what happens to it, frankly, it's up to the shareholders. That is a matter of litigation. And I'll say here, and I've said elsewhere, I won't be surprised if that's litigation that goes on for years and years. And if that's what the Chinese shareholders want to do, then they can knock themselves out. As far as I'm concerned, I'll be happy to engage in that. but that has been cut off and cast away. And if they want to carry on litigating in there for years, they're welcome to do so. But it has got nothing to do any longer with the filings, and the entity that is now executing on this project is Rivada Space Networks GmbH in Germany. That is the operating company. Rivada Space Networks is deploying the constellation, is going to be operating this system, and the ownership of Rivada Space Networks has zero Chinese ownership, influence, or involvement, and is completely separate and comes under Rivada Networks. So this is now a European project with European filings, with the European management team, involving Americans as well, and people from elsewhere around the world, to execute on what will be a global constellation, which is going to be very disruptive and redefining this space. But the Clio Connect history has been detached from this. And as I say, and by the way, I should also say that an offer was made to the Chinese shareholders to redeem them. So, they don't need to there was no way for them to execute on this anyway.
But they rejected it, right?
At the moment, this is something that is a matter before the courts in Germany. And I wish I could tell you more, because it's a fascinating story worthy of a very interesting novel or movie. But yeah, it's their plans for what they had planned to do with Clio Connect and with these European filings. Those plans have been thwarted. And I can tell you, as a European, I'm very glad that they have, and we should all be glad.
What do you think they were trying to obtain from this? I mean, the Chinese part, of course.
A purely commercial network for the good of humanity. I'm sure that something like that is what they would say.
Let's move to something a bit lighter, sustainability. Europe, ESA is particularly sensitive on this topic. Just today was the news that ESA is trying to introduce a sort of self-check system for satellite sustainability. Is your new constellation sustainable? Are your satellites maneuverable? How fast can they deorbit?
So our satellites are not cheap and cheerful. We're not putting up 20 bazillion gillion satellites. So, you read these stories of like the next guy's going to launch 60,000 and someone else is launching 20,000. We're not doing that. We're putting up 600. These will be very high quality platforms. We are in the midst right now of an RFP to satellite suppliers who will be building satellites to requirements. I do not want to sort of color that RFP. It's a competitive process that we're running right now. But all of the things that you've just raised and more are part of the, if you like, the boxes that we need to see being ticked in our RFP. And I think that we're going to have the most sustainable, most responsible constellation deployment, operation, and maintenance plan in the industry.
So carry on the point of sustainability. A few weeks ago, I had the chance to interview Luca Rossettini, the CEO of The Orbit, and we were discussing about the sustainability issue, the debris and everything. And he said that he thinks that this road for sustainability is not to burn satellites when they return into the atmosphere, but instead to try to build a sort of recycling system into which decommissioned satellites can be reused. What do you think about that?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Moving is right up there with death and divorce in the Stress Olympics. But fear not. Turn that box of woes into a crate of woes with moving tips in the Life Beyond Boxes podcast with Premium Q Moving. Dive into the world of hassle-free moves, learn tips and tricks to save on cash and your sanity. Say goodbye to those moving meltdowns and hello to the smooth sailings. Or should we say smooth movings? Tune into Life Beyond Boxes with Premium Q Moving on lifebeyondboxes.com or find us on your favorite podcast platform. And with us, unpack the secrets to a stress-free move.
I don't know enough about it and far be it from me to critique another entrepreneurs. I'd need to know an awful lot more about it. I mean, I'm all for recycling. I hate litter. I mean, on my Twitter post, I have had a habit in the past of walking along my country road in my village in Ireland, picking up Coca-Cola bottles and pointing out that they shouldn't be there, plastic ones and Lucozade bottles. So it's a pet peeve of mine. I'm equally opposed to littering in space. I'm very concerned, by the way, that that some of the lower orbits, this Ukraine situation gets even more out of hand, that we could see actions taken against some satellites that could cause a very, very big problem in terms of debris. I'm all eyes and ears when it comes to cleaning things up. I'm old enough to remember when that Bond movie was in its early days of You Only Live Twice, where it had the satellite gobbling thing that went through space, picking up other spacecraft. Wouldn't it be great if we could have something that could sweep up behind us, deorbiting, burning things up in the upper atmosphere? There's thousands and thousands of meteorites that are burning up there every night. I don't know how much of a problem it is. Frankly, I'm not smart enough to know all of the effects, but there are enough experts out there that know these things better than I do. I'll be listening to them and taking on board what they recommend.
So since you mentioned that now the constellation is fully a European project in a sort of way, how does this new project of yours fit in within the EU and the ESA space strategy of building constellation for Europe?
Yet to be determined in terms of exactly how it fits into a European strategy. I mean, up until very, very recently, this was about to become a Chinese project with a European flag stuck on it somewhere. That's just been changed. So now we have a really cool European filing here with an operating company headquartered in Munich. I think the scope here for Europe to do something is huge. To do something, talking about environment, by the way, the effect of this type of capability across all of the world, but the developing world in particular, is enormous. This is really transformational in terms of what it can do for GDPs. So as a tool for European economic policy, communications policy, this capability, these ultra-low latencies, these high speeds, this level of cybersecurity, this makes for an extremely potent commercial tool in European hands. And I'm enormously excited about it. Broadnet was exciting when we did it in the late 1990s across Europe, but this is much more exciting, and it will have global impact. So, sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but I think that this is something that if Europe wants to, Europeanize this further. I'm an eager European. I'm a notorious European federalist. I was once accused by the Irish Europe minister when I was opposing the Lisbon Treaty because I said it didn't go far enough, which it didn't. I was accused of being an arch federalist. So I'm very keen to see this be a success for Europe and for its allies, of course.
I would love to ask you about Brexit, but then we will digress too much into another
you can ask me. I was opposed to Brexit. I've written, if you Google Declan Ganley Brexit, you will find op-eds written by me saying, please, please, please don't do this. But anyway, it was done. I respect the vote, etc. So what's done is done. But Europe's still plenty big enough. We can get this done.
So what's next for Rivada? Where I'm going to find you in 10 years' time? Let's see. 10 years in the space industry is nothing. It's basically the blink of an eye.
Well, you will find us in 10 years' time having, I hope, and it's my plan, being the global disruptor for the delivery of communication services of gigabytes, where the Internet of Things will have grown to, more than 100 plus devices per capita. There will be not just new businesses, but whole new industry sectors based around this. That this will be revolutionizing agriculture, the environment, having a very positive environmental impact, and will be lifting hundreds of millions, billions of people out of poverty and into the so-called middle class from an income standpoint, better education and better outcomes. And by the way, much more cyber secure networks. And Rivada will be central to that. I see Rivada being the Amazon, if you will, the Google, the, pick your brand, but that scale of a disruptor in this space. And look, we've had a lot of opponents, traditional carriers like AT&T, pretty famously in the United States, have fought tooth and nail to try and stop us from creating this disruption. We're going to do it. And space and the LEO constellations are going to be an extremely important, even central plank of that plan.
Is there something you would like to add, something I didn't ask?
I suppose it's important for a CEO and an entrepreneur that's as average as me to point to the fact that any success like this, any project like this takes brilliant people and a team of extraordinary talent. And just to say that it is a rare privilege and good fortune in my life that I get to work with a team of brilliant engineers, technicians, PhDs, business people from around the world, from Germany, from elsewhere around the world that are at the absolute top of their field. And what an honor it is to do that. And that without them, none of this could be happening. And I'm grateful to them. And I want to recognize them. This isn't about some entrepreneur that's sort of, changing everything. Behind great entrepreneurs, if you look underneath their feet, you'll see they're standing on the shoulders of much more talented people. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm very grateful to them.
Of course, the space sector requires the famous three factors, money, talent, and tech. Otherwise, you cannot proceed with that. Thanks a lot, Declan, for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And please come back when you have some fantastic news on the progress of your constellation. To anyone else, thank you for listening to Space Café Radio. And of course, I will see you next time. Bye.
Ciao for now.
Thank you, Space Watcher, for listening to our Space Café Radio. You can find all our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Buzzsprout. Don't forget also to check out our weekly web talks, our regional space cafes, and obviously our website, which is the best place to keep yourself posted with what's going on in the exciting world of the space economy. This is Emma, and I will see you next time. Ciao.